The knock at my door was sharp and urgent. My parents stood there, cold and silent. Without a word, they handed me a letter, a bill for every birthday, loan, and Christmas dinner, demanding I repay them by covering my brother's $80,000 debt. When I refused, they didn't just cut me off. They came after my job, my life, everything I'd built. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. First, let's go back to where it all began. I always believed the bond within our family was forged from something unbreakable: fairness, loyalty, unconditional love. But standing in the dim kitchen that night, phone pressed against my ear, I realized how paper-thin those illusions really were. My name is Rachel Cooper. I'm 28 years old, a trauma nurse in Seattle, someone who has built her life around saving others, patients, strangers. I never imagined I would have to defend myself against my own blood. For as long as I could remember, I had been the steady one. The daughter who didn't make waves, who stitched her own wounds, who celebrated quiet victories alone and swallowed disappointments in silence. Meanwhile, my brother Jake floated from crisis to crisis like it was his birthright. He was the kind of man people called full of potential, until the day they realized he had spent it all on late-night poker games and get-rich-quick schemes. The call came late, when the city outside my window had already gone dark and heavy with sleep. My phone lit up with Mom and Dad, and even before I answered, I felt the old knot tighten in my chest, the one that only came when they needed something. My mother's voice, ragged with panic, hit me before I could even say hello. "Jake is in trouble," she gasped, her words tripping over each other. My father's gruff voice cut in, less frantic but no less urgent, like a man already bracing for impact. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't ease into it. Jake owed over $80,000 to people who didn't believe in second chances. If he didn't pay, something terrible would happen. And without the slightest tremor of hesitation, they named me the solution. "You have savings," my mother said, her voice shaking. But underneath it I heard something harder, something expectant. "It's your duty as family," she pleaded, as if my entire worth rested on how quickly I could hand over the lifeboat. I stood frozen, the hum of the refrigerator roaring in my ears. "Why should I pay for his mistakes?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. There was a pause, deep and dangerous. Then my father spoke, each word deliberate and sharp. "Because you can. He can't." In that moment, the years of quiet sacrifices I had made meant nothing. My hard-earned stability, the nights working double shifts, the student loans I had paid off early, they were all invisible. All that mattered was that I had something Jake didn't, and they wanted it. When I said no, when the word finally tore itself out of my throat, there was no negotiation, no second plea, only a terrifying calm in my mother's voice as she hissed, "If you refuse, consider yourself no longer part of this family." The call ended without goodbyes, and for a long time I stood there, the weight of it sinking into my bones, the silence in my apartment louder than any scream. I tried to reason with them. I laid it out as calmly and clearly as I could, that covering Jake's debts wouldn't save him. It would only bury him deeper. I reminded them of the dozens of times they had rescued him before, the endless second chances that had never taught him anything except how to manipulate his way out of consequences. But logic had no place in their world. Their love wasn't about fairness or accountability, it was about allegiance. Blind, unquestioning allegiance to the one who needed saving, no matter how many times he set himself on fire. A week passed in silence, or what I thought was silence, until a knock rattled my apartment door late on a Saturday afternoon. I opened it to find my parents standing there, shoulder to shoulder, stiff and formal like two prosecutors ready to deliver a sentence. They didn't ask to come in. They didn't smile. Without a word, my father extended a manila envelope toward me, the kind you use when you don't trust words to carry the full weight of your message. Inside was a letter, 2 pages, printed in bold, mechanical font. It was an itemized list, birthday gifts from the age of 3 onward, the down payment they had helped with when I bought my first used car, the fraction of my tuition they had contributed before I took over the loans myself. Even Christmas dinners had a price tag attached, absurdly calculated down to the turkey and pie. At the bottom, in heavy black ink, was the conclusion. Family is a debt you repay when called upon. You owe us. I didn't know rage could feel so cold. It wasn't the anger of an argument. It was the frozen realization that love, in their eyes, had been transactional all along. Every smile, every hug, every proud word at my nursing graduation. It was all, apparently, part of some invisible ledger they had kept meticulously updated behind my back. But they hadn't finished. Within days, word trickled back to me that my parents had called my hospital's administration office, pretending to be concerned about my mental state after a family tragedy. It was a thinly veiled attempt to paint me as unstable, to corner me into compliance by threatening the only thing they knew I truly valued, my career. The betrayal didn't just cut, it hollowed. I wasn't their daughter anymore, not really. I was a resource they were willing to sabotage to protect Jake, a disposable tool they had no shame in breaking if it meant shielding their favorite from the consequences he refused to face. And standing there, clutching that letter, I understood something I should have seen long ago. Jake was never the golden child because he earned it. He was the golden child because someone else, me, was always there to pay the bill. It would have been so easy to surrender, to grab my checkbook with shaking hands, write out a number that would have gutted my savings, and paste on the brittle smile that kept the word family intact, even as it hollowed me out. A part of me, a part still desperate to believe in them, whispered that maybe compliance would buy back their love, or at least the illusion of it. But something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not explosively. It was a quiet, almost surgical severing, as if a blade I didn't even know I carried had finally been unsheathed. I started by blocking their numbers. There was a moment of hesitation, a moment where my thumb hovered over the screen, the memories of birthdays, Sunday dinners, and tearful hugs flashing like a reel behind my eyes. And then I pressed block. First Mom, then Dad, then Jake, erasing them from my immediate world with a finality that tasted of ash and steel. I changed the locks on my apartment the next morning. It felt obscene, needing to protect my home from the people who had once hung a hand-painted welcome home sign when I came back from college. But sentimentality had no place anymore. I watched the locksmith work, the old lock dropping into his palm like a relic from another life, and told myself that grief could come later. Now was the time for survival. At the hospital, I made a quiet but firm report to HR. I laid out the situation clinically, detaching myself from the humiliation of explaining how my own parents had weaponized lies against me. The HR officer took notes, nodding solemnly, and assured me that any further contact from them would be documented and dealt with swiftly. It was a small shield, but it was mine. Jake didn't give up easily. He took his crusade public, posting cryptic barbs on social media like smoke signals to the people we both knew. "Some people only love you when you're useful," he wrote, and the words were laced with just enough venom to turn mutual friends into hesitant questioners. The subtext was clear. I was heartless. I was selfish. I had abandoned him in his hour of need. But instead of guilt, his posts fanned the flames inside me. They burned away the last threads of obligation I clung to, leaving behind something harder, cleaner. I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the one who had finally stepped off the altar they kept trying to sacrifice me on. For the first time, I saw it all with brutal clarity. I had never been loved for who I was, only for what I could provide. Affection had been dangled like a carrot on a stick, a transaction masked as tenderness. The price of their approval had always been my self-respect, and without realizing it, I had been paying it in installments my entire life, no more. The debt was canceled, the transaction was over. 6 months later, my life looked nothing like the shattered ruins I once feared it might become. In fact, it felt like I had stepped into a different existence altogether, one that had always been waiting for me, just beyond the shadow they had cast. I stood barefoot on the worn wood porch of my new home, a small lakefront cottage an hour outside Seattle, the kind of place I used to imagine during long, sleepless nights when the pressure of being the good daughter felt like a weight I couldn't throw off. The morning air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and the only sounds were the gentle lap of water against the shore and the occasional call of a loon across the lake. This place wasn't big or fancy, but it was mine, every inch of it paid for by my own labor, untouched by any hand that would dare to claim it as leverage. Without the endless emergencies, guilt trips, and financial black holes my family created, my savings flourished. The anxiety that had knotted itself into every corner of my being began to loosen, thread by agonizing thread, until it finally unraveled and drifted away. I enrolled back in school part-time, slipping into evening classes after my shifts at the hospital. Pediatric nursing had been a dream shelved for practicality's sake, another sacrifice stacked quietly in the invisible ledger I once believed I owed them. Now, I chased it for no one but myself. Every class I completed, every exam I passed, felt like reclaiming a piece of the girl I used to be, the one who dared to want things for herself, not just for the approval of others. And then, like distant thunder rolling across the lake, the consequences of their choices arrived. Jake filed for bankruptcy. The stories trickled down to me through mutual acquaintances. The repossession of the sports car my parents had gifted him for his 25th birthday. The eviction notice he tried to fight but couldn't outrun. My parents, refusing even now to let go of their golden boy, mortgaged their home to cover his debts, only to find themselves drowning in bills they could no longer afford. The house I grew up in, the only thing they had left to show for a lifetime of sacrifices, hung under the shadow of foreclosure. I didn't celebrate their downfall. There were no whispered prayers of vengeance fulfilled, no secret toasts to their misfortune. I simply watched from a distance, detached, a little sad perhaps, but firm in my decision. They had made their choices, and for once, I had made mine. Today, my life belongs to me. My paycheck buys textbooks and repairs to my tiny dock, not bailouts for reckless gamblers. My Sundays are spent kayaking, reading, studying, not sitting in living rooms thick with blame and obligation. Freedom, I learned, isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just the quiet certainty that you owe no one an explanation for your peace. And sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you have to keep. Sometimes the family you build within yourself, the boundaries you draw, the dreams you nurture, is more than enough.